chers collègues.
Colleagues, friends, I call the meeting open. We welcome to number 107 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. We're going to be in hybrid format, and we are going to introduce our witness. We have a small question. We have to first elect a second vice president and member of an opposition party other than the official opposition. I'm ready to receive any candidates or nomination for the second VP of the committee. Would someone like to introduce us to Mr. Garon?
So, Mr. Biddle, donc la motion a été déposée par Monsieur.
Motion moved by Mr. Bello that Jean-Gary Garon be elected second vice chair of the committee. Any other proposals or nominations? Seeing none, do we have the approval by consent? Well, the motion is then carried. Mr. Garon, welcome. Congratulations on your election. You've got big shoes to fill. Mr. Lemire spent years at this committee, and he was an excellent parliamentarian, and I'm sure you can do as good a job. So thank you. Welcome aboard. Before going to C27, you also have a budget or a request for supplementary budget. C27, $6,000 as a supplement. The information is before you. Do we have consent? Yes? Good. Thank you. That's done. So to the referral, we will return with pursuant to the order of April the 24th, we're going to resume consideration of Bill C-37, Act to Enact Consumer Protection Privacy Act, and so forth. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, Vas Bedar, Executive Director, Master of Public Policy and Digital Security Society Programs. McMaster, thank you. Welcome. Andrew Clement, Professor Emeritus, Faculty of Information, U of Toronto. And we have Nicolas Pepernot, Assistant Professor and Canadian CFAR AI Chair, University of Toronto. Apologize to all witnesses for the delay.
We had about 10 votes in the House of Commons, and because of the delay, we have until about 7 p.m. for the testimonies and the questions. And without further ado, I will start with you, Madame Bednar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Vas Bednar. You heard that I run the Master of Public Policy program in Digital Society at McMaster University, where I'm an adjunct professor of political science. I engage with Canada's policy community broadly as a senior fellow at CG, a fellow with the Public Policy Forum, and through my newsletter Regs to Riches, I'm also a member of the Provincial Privacy Commissioner's Strategic Ad Hoc Advisory Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear. I appreciate the work of this committee, and I do agree that there is an urgent need to modernize Canada's legislative framework so that it's suited in the digital age. I also want to note I've been on a sabbatical of sorts for the past year, and I have not followed every detailed element of debate of this bill in deep detail. That made me a little bit anxious about appearing, but then I remembered, you know what, I'm not on the committee. I'm appearing before the committee, so I decided to be as constructive as I could be today. And as we consider this framework for privacy, consumer protection, and artificial intelligence, I really think we're fundamentally negotiating trust in our digital economy, what that looks like for citizens, and actually articulating what responsible innovation is supposed to look like. And that's what gets me excited about the direction that we're going. Very briefly on the privacy side, it's well known or being well said that this is not the most consumer-centric privacy legislation that we see from other jurisdictions, right? It does provide clarity for businesses, both large and small, which is good. And, small businesses especially, I don't think the requirements for smaller businesses are overly onerous. The elements on consent, which have been well debated, zooming in on that language beyond what is necessary, I think is such a major hinge of debate, right? Who gets to decide what is necessary and when? I think the precedent of consent, of course, is critical. And I think about a future where, as people who are experiencing our online world or exchanging information with businesses, there's just way more autonomy for consumers, right? Being able to search without self-preferencing algorithms that dictate the order of what you see, seeing prices that aren't tailored to you, or even knowing that there is a personalized dynamic pricing situation, accessing discounts through loyalty programs without trading your privacy to use them, or, simple things like returning to an online store that you've shopped at before without seeing these, so-called special offers based on your browsing or purchase history. So that tension, I think, is probably going to be core to our continued conversation around that need for organizations to collect. On algorithmic collusion, recent reporting from the New Statesman elaborated on how the prices of most goods now are set not by humans, but by automatic processes that are set to maximize their owners' gains. This is big academic conversation about the line between what's exploitative and what's efficient. Our evolving competition law may soon begin to consider algorithmic collusion, which may also, garner more attention through advancements on C27 as it prompts the consideration of the effects of algorithmic conduct in the public interest. Again, very briefly on the AI side, I agree with others that the AI commissioner should be more empowered, perhaps as an officer of parliament, and that they need to be properly funded in order to do this work. And note that the provinces may want to create their own AI frameworks as a way to solve for some of the ambiguities or intersections, and that we should embrace and celebrate that in a Canadian Federalist context. In the spirit of being constructive and forward-looking, I wonder if we should be taking some more inspiration from very familiar policy areas of labeling and manufacturing, just to achieve more disclosure. For the layer of transparency that's proposed for those that manage a general-purpose AI system, ensuring that individuals can identify AI-generated content. This is also critical for the result of any algorithmically generated system. Right. Also, we probably need either a nutrition facts label approach to privacy or a registration requirement. I would hope that we can avoid onerous audits or kind of spurring strange secondary economies that sprout and maybe aren't as necessary as they seem. Having to register novel AI systems with ISED so that the government can keep tabs on potential harms and justifications for them entering into the Canadian market would be helpful. I will wrap up in just a moment. Of course, you should all be thinking about how this legislation will work with other policy levers, especially in light of the recently struck Digital Regulators Forum. Much of my work is rooted in competition issues, issues of market fairness and freedom. And I note that in the US, the FTC held a technology summit on artificial intelligence just last week. And there it was noted that, and this is a quote, "We see a tech ecosystem that has concentrated power in the hands of a small number of firms while entrenching a business model built on the constant surveillance of consumers. Canadian policy people need to be more honest about connecting these dots, and we should be doing more to question that core business model and ensure that we're not enshrining it going forward." A final, very quick worry, a worry about productivity, which I know everyone's thinking about. I have this concern that our productivity crisis in Canada will fundamentally kind of act to, whether implicitly or explicitly, discourage regulation of any kind. Right? At the risk, this kind of phantom zombie risk of impeding this elusive thing we call innovation, and wanted to remind all of us that smart regulation clarifies markets and levels the playing field. Thanks for having me.
Merci beaucoup, Mme Bednar. Je passerai la parole à Monsieur Clement.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clemens, you have the floor.
Professeur, je pense que vous êtes en sourdine.
Professor, I think you may be muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, I am Andrew Clement, a professor emeritus in the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. As a computer scientist who started in the field of artificial intelligence, I've been researching the computerization of society and its social implications since the 1970s. I'm one of 3 pro bono contributors to the Center of Digital Rights report on C27 that Jim Bousley spoke to you here. I will address the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, ADA, exclusively in my remarks. AI, better interpreted as algorithmic intensification, has a long history. For all its benefits, from well before the current acceleration around deep neural networks, AI misapplication has already hurt many people. Unfortunately, the loudest voices driving public fear are coming from tech giant leaders well known for their anti-government, anti-regulation attitudes. These move fast and break things figures are now demanding urgent government intervention while jockeying for industry dominance. This is distracting and demands our skepticism. Judicious AI regulation focused on actual risks is long overdue, and self-regulation won't work. Minister Champagne wants to make Canada a world leader in AI governance. That's a fine goal, but it's as if we are in an international Grand Prix. Apparently, to allay the fears of Canadians, he abruptly entered a Made in Canada contender. Beyond the proud maple leaf and him smiling at the wheel, his Ada vehicle barely had a chassis and an engine. He insisted he was simply being, quote, agile, promising that if you just help him propel him over the finish line, all would be fixed through the regulations. But as Professor Skaza has pointed out, there's no prize for first place. Good governance isn't even a race, but an ongoing mutual learning project. With so much uncertainty about the promise and perils of AI, public consultation informed by expertise is a vital precondition for establishing a sound legal foundation. Canada also needs to carefully study developments in the EU, US, and elsewhere before settling on its own approach. As many witnesses have pointed out, Ada is deeply flawed in substance and process from the get-go. Jamming it onto the overdue modernization of PIPEDA made it much harder to give that and the AI legislation the thorough review they each merit. The minister initially gave himself sweeping regulatory powers, putting him in a conflict of interest with his mandate to, quote, advance Canada's AI industry. His recent amendments don't go anywhere near far enough to achieve the necessary regulatory independence. Minister Champagne claimed to you that Ada offers a long-lasting framework based on principles. It does not. The most serious flaw is the absence of any public consultation, either with experts or Canadians more generally, before or since introducing Ada. It means that it has not benefited from a suitably broad range of perspectives. Most fundamentally, it lacks democratic legitimacy, which can't be repaired by the current parliamentary process. The minister appears sensitive to this issue. As a witness here, he bragged that ISED led more than 300 meetings with academics, businesses, and members of civil society regarding this bill. And in his subsequent letter, providing you with a list of those meetings, he claimed that, quote, we made a particular effort to reach out to stakeholders with a diversity of perspectives. My analysis of this list of meetings sent to you on December 6th shows that this is misleading. Overwhelmingly, ISED held meetings with business organizations, 223 meetings in all, of which 36 were with US tech giants. Only 9 meetings were with Canadian civil society organizations. Most striking by their complete absence are any organizations representing those that Ada is claimed to protect most, i.e. organizations whose members are likely to be directly affected by AI applications. Citizens, Indigenous peoples, consumers, immigrants, parents, children, marginalized communities, and workers or professionals in healthcare, finance, education, manufacturing, agriculture, the arts, media, communication, transportation, all the areas where AI is claimed to have benefits. Ada breaks democratic norms in ways that can't be fixed through amendments alone. It should therefore be sent back for proper redrafting. My written brief offers suggestions on how this could be accomplished in an agile manner within the timetable originally projected for Ada. However, I realize that the shared political will for pursuing this option may not currently be achievable. If you do decide that this ADA is to proceed, then I urge you to repair its many serious flaws as best you can. In these 8 areas, at the very least. First, sever ADA from parts 1 and 2 of C27 so each of the sub-bills can be given proper attention. Position the AI and Data Commissioner at arm's length from ICED, appropriately staffed and adequately funded. Third, provide ADA with a mandatory review cycle requiring any renewal or revision to be evidence-based, expert-informed, independently moderated, and genuine public consultation. This should involve a proactive outreach to stakeholders not included in ICED's C27 meetings to date, starting with the consultations on the regulations. I'm reminded here of the familiar saying, if you're not welcome at the table, check that you're not on the menu. Some more areas of concern. Expand the scope of harms beyond individuals or to include collective and systemic harms, as you've heard from others. Base key requirements on robust, widely accepted principles in the legislation and not solely in regulations or schedules. Ground such a principles-based framework explicitly in the protection of fundamental human rights and compliance with international humanitarian law, in keeping with the Council of Europe pending treaty, which Canada has been involved with. You should replace the inappropriate concept of high-impact systems with a fully tiered, risk-based scheme, such as the EU AI Act does. Finally, tightly specify a set of unacceptably high-risk systems for prohibition. I could go on. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Clement. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Monsieur Papernotte.
Inviting me to appear here today. I'm an assistant professor of computer engineering and computer science at the University of Toronto, a faculty member at the Vector Institute, where I hold a Canada CFAR AI chair, and a faculty affiliate at the Schwartz-Reisman Institute. Mon domaine d'expertise se trouve à l'intersection de la...
My expertise is in informatics, and my personal interest is there. I'd like to begin with the bill IDA on the protection of consumers. Visa Austin, David Lee, and fellow Professor Sasho Nikolov.
Current form creates the right incentives for adoption of privacy-preserving data analysis standards. Specifically, the Act's reliance on de-identification as a privacy protection tool is misplaced. For example, as you know, the Act allows organizations to disclose personal information to some others for socially beneficial purposes if the personal information is de-identified. As a researcher in this field, I would say that de-identification creates a false sense of security. Indeed, we can use algorithms to find patterns in data, even when steps have been taken to hide those patterns. For instance, the state of Victoria in Australia released public transit data that was de-identified by replacing each traveler's smart card ID with a unique random ID. The logic was no IDs means no identities. However, researchers showed that mapping their own trips, where they tapped on and off public transit, allowed them to re-identify themselves. Equipped with that knowledge, they then learned the random IDs assigned to their colleagues. And once they had knowledge of their colleagues' random IDs, they could find out about any other trip, weekend trips, doctor visits, all things that most would expect to be private. En tant que chercheur dans ce domaine,
as a specialist expert in this field, this doesn't surprise me.
Can automate finding these patterns. With AI, such re-identification can happen for a large portion of individuals in the dataset. This makes the Act problematic when trying to regulate privacy in the AI world. Instead of de-identification, the technical community has embraced different approaches to privacy data analysis, like differential privacy. Differential privacy has been shown to work well with AI and can demonstrate privacy even if some things are already known about the data. For example, it would have protected the colleague's privacy in the example I gave just earlier. Because differential privacy does not depend upon modifying personal information, this creates a mismatch between what the Act requires and emerging best technical practices. Je vais maintenant commenter la loi sur l'IA et les données. Le projet de loi initial.
I'd like now to deal with ADA. The initial bill is ambiguous in its definition of an AI system offered, and the recommendations made last November were going in the right track. Now, the problem should be clarified as data as governance.
Aspects of data governance that can result in harmful AI systems. For example, improper care when curating data leads to a non-representative data set. My colleagues and I have illustrated this risk with synthetic data used to train AI systems that generate images or text. If the output of these AI systems is being fed back to them, that is to train new AI systems, these new AI systems perform poorly. The analogy one might use is how the photocopy of a photocopy becomes unreliable. What's more, this phenomenon can disparately impact populations that are already at risk of being subject of harmful AI biases, which can propagate discrimination. So I would like to see broader considerations at the data curation stage captured in the Act. Coming back to the bill itself, I encourage you to think about producing support documents to help with its dissemination. AI is a very fast-paced field, and it's not an exaggeration to say that there are new developments every day. As a researcher, it is important that I educate the future generation of AI talent on what it means to design responsible AI. So in finalizing the bill, please consider plain language documents that academics and others can use in the classroom or the laboratory. It will go a long way. Enfin, puisque le comité travaille.
And as your committee is now working on the regulation of AI, I'd like to observe that the bill will have little impact on the environment of AI.
That tried to recruit me, I did so because Canada offered me the best possible research environment to do my work on responsible AI, thanks to the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. 7 years into the strategy, AI funding in Canada has not kept up to pace. Other countries have larger funding for students and better compute infrastructure, both of which are needed to stay at the forefront of responsible AI research. Je vous remercie pour vos travaux.
I thank the committee for its work, which established a broad role for responsible AI, improved, and I point out that this is the most important here in Canada. Thank you.
So to start the conversation, I'll yield the floor to MP Rempel Gardner. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our guests.
I'll direct my questions to Dr. Papernaut and to Dr. Clement, and scope my questions specifically on the ADA component of the bill. Since this bill was last debated at this committee, there have been several, as you said, Dr. Papernaut, like very real-life examples of where a lack of a regulatory structure or application of current legislation has created ambiguity and potential social harm. So I'd like to begin with the issue of Canada's intimate image distribution laws and the fact that the Canadian Bar Association and many other legal professionals have said that Canada's existing laws may not adequately cover or protect women, particularly in the distribution of deep fakes, deep nudes that have been put online. Do you believe that this bill provides a timeline or provisions that would protect Canadians in this regard? And I'll start with Dr. Clement.
Thank you for that question. I don't believe that it offers a timeline for the concerns that you raised, but I'm reminded that there has been in the works for years now an online harms bill that has undergone extensive consultation, public citizens forums.
I have limited time. I'm just looking specifically for this bill. Do you believe that this bill adequately covers that provision?
I would say not.
Thank you, Dr. Papineau. Papineau.
My comments here would be that the bill is not clear enough when it comes to monitoring AI system outputs.
Perfect.
And so this is very difficult because we don't have very good visibility of how different users of an AI system could compose the outputs that they each get to then lead to harmful behavior.
So that would speak to the fact that this bill doesn't create the environment in which enforcement provisions could be adequately utilized by law enforcement professionals should existing laws surrounding, let's say, intimate image distribution be expanded to cover artificial intelligence. Is that correct?
That's right.
I would then go to intellectual property ownership. Since this bill was last debated at this committee, the New York Times undertook a very significant lawsuit against OpenAI and Microsoft for the use of their intellectual property in the creation of their and training of their large language models. Do you believe that the decision regarding intellectual property ownerships or the determination of intellectual property ownership should be left to the courts, or should it be addressed in a more formal legal format?
I don't have the right expertise to comment on that. What I will say is that it's currently impossible, technically speaking, to trace back the prediction that a model makes back to the data that it learned that behavior from. And so it would be very difficult to trace back what are the offending pieces of training data that the copyright claims are being made with respect to.
Do you believe, though, that that speaks to the need for perhaps parliamentary oversight or legislative oversight on defining what constitutes intellectual property theft in terms of input in training large language models?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Clement.
Yeah, as the witness mentioned in his testimony, there is insufficient focus in this bill on curation, and curation is of the input, the training data is incredibly important. And if, as he's just said, that you can't trace back where something has come from, that is a big problem in itself. And the New York Times case is going to be a big one.
Do you believe that there's something this committee could do or that the government should be doing, again, to sort of have a legislative imperative as opposed to just leaving this to interpretations by the courts, which are using laws that did not anticipate this type of technology?
Well, copyright is not an area of my expertise, but I would say that updating the Copyright Act and then linking that into this bill would be a way to go.
Of this bill to address the challenge that Canadians are facing with regard to AI regulation?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
I would just say, would you characterize that particular aspect as an example of how this legislation fails to adequately address or provide a proper and comprehensive regulatory framework to address some of the challenges that Canada is facing with regard to artificial intelligence governance?
I believe it is an area that is missing here, or that needs to be developed.
Dr. Papineau and Dr. Clement, just simply put, do you believe that this legislation is up to the task, that it is going to put Canada, that it's adequate? Do you think it's salvageable? Dr. Clement, you had strong feelings on this. I'll go to you first.
Yes, well, I made clear that I don't think this is a suitable AI legislation. Whether it's salvageable, it depends on what your criteria are. There's clearly many areas where it could be improved.
Canada is at risk because this is so inadequate of us promulgating regulatory systems that are put in place in either the EU or the United States through trade agreements like CUSMA and CETA, because we haven't really thought about our own domestic frameworks before looking at how these trade agreements, provisions in these trade agreements, could force us to promulgate the data ownership or AI regulations of other major jurisdictions.
Well, I'll let my colleague address that.
In terms of the act, I don't think it's adequate in its current form.
I have one very quick question.
Very quick, Madam.
Effective accelerationism, yes or no? This is the mantra that's being espoused by Mark Andreessen and Jan LeCun, that we should all leave AI to be self-regulated by industry and leave humanity to the vices of our benevolent AI overlords.
Absolutely. Absolutely no.
Or no?
I think it's very clear that there's a need for consultation of more stakeholders in this process.
I would agree. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. MP Gahir, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for making time for this committee. My first question is for Ms. Bednar. In your opening testimony, you had mentioned a term, algorithmic collusion. Could you just elaborate on that, what that is, and if you think it's already happening, and sort of how we're already seeing it?
I will do my best. So this is an area where, we have complementary kind of tools and levers that would go alongside this legislation, right, through our Competition Act. We also have provisions in the Competition Act under false and misleading advertising, which I think could be a helpful tool for some of the deception that people can see or experience when they are communicated with or by or receive the result of an algorithmically generated decision result. On algorithmic collusion, the question there is when, machines, when these systems are speaking to each other to either determine a price or, in bidding, we see that Walmart and other companies are using increasingly algorithmic systems to negotiate with other algorithmic systems. Is this a form of digital collusion that we would say is unacceptable, or is this just an advancement in terms of, again, our efficiency, our ability to negotiate rapidly to set prices or other outcomes? It's not like my main area. It's an area of interest and curiosity and something I've been researching. Yeah, so I'm happy to defer to other witnesses too.
Does anyone else want to speak on this?
I will say that the example I mentioned in my opening statement with the photocopy, what this is illustrating is that when you have multiple AI systems interacting together, this can lead to eventually very poor performance because they respectively each lose their ability to model the underlying phenomena. So we are currently studying this in our lab, this negative interaction, and it's not going to help people who are already at risk of being harmed by AI.
So I guess the question that I have is this already happening? And, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a competition lawyer, but a simple example is if two companies sort of collude to set the price of bread, for example. When AI does this, is there any evidence? Is there a trail of evidence that this collusion has taken place or not?
I see that Andrew has his hand up. Oh, sorry. I don't know who you're directing it to because we're not on the floor.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to the idea of algorithmic collusion. The bigger issue of which that I think is an example is that we do not know how these algorithms are being used That's all hidden and proprietary. And there is enormous financial market incentives for companies to take advantage of whatever they can about their data. And there might be indirect collusion in terms of just creating an environment where algorithmic amplification or reinforcement, or however you want to go, becomes quite powerful, but still very opaque.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Paperno. So you had mentioned in your opening testimony that there's new developments in AI every single day, that it's an ever-changing field. Can you talk to the committee more about the minister's suggested amendment on high-impact systems, high-impact classes, that there will be a schedule, there's an initial list of high-impact classes that will be modified through regulation to keep it flexible as the technology advances. Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one issue with identifying specific systems as being high impact is we have to keep in mind that AI systems can impact other forms of algorithmic data analysis. And so, again, the outputs that these systems make can influence other systems downstream. And so that's something I think to keep in mind so that we don't completely deregulate those that are not considered as high impact.
So what system would you propose? How would you change the law as it's currently worded?
That's not my expertise yet.
Okay. This is generally open for the committee, but we've heard a lot about comparative pieces about the EU regulation and the regulation that we're proposing here. How does ADA align with what's happening in the EU?
So I will say that the European Union legislation has a similar issue that it relies too excessively on de-identification. So as I mentioned in my statement, the fact that the privacy legislation puts too much emphasis on modifying personal information puts it at odds with what the technology is currently being developed can do. So we're no longer in this world where we protect data by modifying it. We're protecting data by carefully analyzing it with guarantees that come from the way the data is analyzed. And so I think that just underlies the entire, if you look at IDA and CPPA, both of them rely too excessively on de-identification to be implementable in a world where people are going to analyze data with AI. And this is the same in other legislation. It's the same in the European Union.
Yeah. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gaillard. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Garon, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for their appearance. Mr. Paperno, I'll start with you, if you may. You said in the law there's nothing that would guarantee that anonymity would be preserved. So de-identification or anonymization are methods that seem to have existed. It's commonly known to economists and others, and you get the same result. But as you clearly mentioned, algorithms can still do a detour in a roundabout way and recapture the identity. Are there any methods that would guarantee anonymity? I think that the technology is evolving very, very rapidly. Is there not something that might have a wider or broader scope that would guarantee anonymity at a much faster rhythm than the actual growth and exploitation of these algorithms? Well, this looks at de-identification as one of the sole methods, as the main method to protect anonymity, protect privacy. Many other techniques could be used to ensure much more securely and protect much more securely individuals. and have algorithms that are much more useful for society. I don't mean to interrupt. The challenge that we face, of course, is that we are looking in this act or bill of various ways to identify, to protect anonymity. You've mentioned others. 5 years from now, do you think we might have other methods that we don't exist today? I don't see any method currently that can, any other method to protect individual data, private data, so that to arrive at anonymization in general, it's impossible within this bill. We can always re-identify the source of data. And we once it's disclosed, we can't shut the door on it. These in my example, colleagues working in the same environment could track the trips of their colleagues, even though they were given random ID. Scientifically, it's impossible to anonymize data. So you can consider, you have to consider other methods that don't depend on de-identification by analyzing data directly. You continue using the data, but they are manipulated differently. And that there's nothing, no mention of that in the bill. That's correct, not mentioned at all. The techniques that are most advanced today, and we are currently still researching these methods, are not compatible with the bill. Well, could you could you give us some more information in writing, perhaps at a later point, to explain that more clearly? Yes, certainly. Well, something that might seem innocuous to you, my colleague, Ms. Garner, you talked of copyright and IP. Now, I don't have the expertise, but you've mentioned it's not always possible, given the results of the model that was used. Still, there are risks. We really don't know. They're not transparent. But my question may be naive. If tomorrow we have a new child, brand new, he doesn't exist, would you say we should prohibit posting his picture on the internet? No. But the message is fairly clear that the confidence or lack of confidence that you have on the system as it now exists. Some individuals are telling us this bill is inadequate, insufficient. We should set it aside, start from square one. There are other laws, of course, that might come into conflict with that. Other laws that protect privacy and data. Do you think C-27 could be amended, improved, or do you think it's a loss of time? No. As I was saying earlier, you have to take into consideration new technologies that have been developed over the last 15 years, which how private information has been used. And this will allow you to develop methods that are alternate, other systems, all the while protecting privacy of individuals, whose data, of course, is being used to create more data. So you have to change that part of the law, which says we have to modify or mask the data in order to make it useful. Okay, so it's a methodology of analysis of the data. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Massé, you have the floor.
To get them involved in the conversation, Mr. Clement first and then Ms. Bednar. Mr. Clement, you mentioned about the amount of meetings, 223 meetings being with the business sector. One of the things that was brought up, I thought was an interesting question by Mr. Gear, was the algorithms. And I guess I'm wondering, with only focusing on consultations with the companies, we've seen at this committee in the past, whether it be gas pricing, where there's vertical integration in the industry, where there's no real competition because refining is all done by a select group of corporations. In fact, you have some brand name gas that's basically moved from market to market. And we've seen as well, too, specifically bread price fixing. And we've also had, the Competition Bureau in on that. And we've even seen the CEOs admit to us that they didn't even have to collude to get rid of hero pay for grocery store retailer staff. They got rid of it all at the same day. Miraculously, they came to the same conclusion. So the question I have specifically is there a potential for, I guess, through the private sector to create algorithms that actually also reduce further competition? You can have, you don't even have to have collusion with, you have a lack of competition, which we have in many markets in Canada. So maybe start with Mr. Clement on that, concerns about more algorithms being used to define the Canadian marketplace against consumers.
Well, let's start with the big ones, particularly in the context of AI. There's only like 3 or 4 companies at this point that have the financial and the technical means to develop large language models. So you've already started off with a very highly concentrated market before you go much further. There may be competition among some of the adaptations of that, but that is the way that the industry is going generally. Of course, it's very complicated. There's lots of things going on, but we're certainly in a position where the few large actors, think of Amazon, just have so much market power that they can shape markets to their interest. I hope that answers your question.
No, that does. It's something that just kind of I touched on just through some correspondence and reading that hasn't, I don't think, gotten a lot of attention. I go to Ms. Bednar with regards to the AI commissioner. We've seen, and I'll give the minister credit that there has been some changes to the Competition Bureau. There has been some increased funding over even, the previous government to this government. There was some modest changes. We still have a long way to go, in my opinion, to protect consumers. But I'm just wondering, the AI commissioner, how do we keep the AI commissioner in the game as artificial intelligence expands its horizons, and then on top of that, to have the right tools and the right enforcement powers? That's what I'm really worried about, is that we have a commissioner that doesn't have the strength and doesn't have the budget to deal with some of the complications that we get.
I share that concern that they may not be empowered enough or have the tools that they need and that we want them to have. I mean, I also want to say that a lot of the dangers that we're talking about are exacerbated during these periods of regulatory lag, where during these periods of regulatory lag, new business techniques that the laws are ambiguous on become the new normal. So with, algorithms negotiating with suppliers or setting prices, as this becomes a new normal, it's going to be harder for us and harder for the state to have legitimacy to sort of renegotiate or sort of finally identify this behavior as something that can be a concern. I think there's a natural tension to have the AI work, happening within ISED, and that we see some of this tension play out similarly on the competition side, and that Canadians would benefit from this individual having a stronger, more independent mandate as well as a more independent voice. Those are some quick thoughts. I know others have made more substantive suggestions to this committee in that regard.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. I'm going to move to Mr. Papernaut with regards to having to do enforcement into the private sector. You mentioned about how your funding or the funding for AI research has not kept pace. In part of this bill, should we have the consideration almost like a proceeds to crime, where fines and penalties or conduct that results in that maybe goes to fund research for AI, specifically to address the problems that we might face? There's a lot of good things. We're focusing a lot on the negative right now, but at the same time, I'm just wondering if, how do we keep up on the private sector that, and if there's problems, How do we fund solving those problems without it just going back onto the public?
So it's a bit out of my expertise. I don't want you to do you a disservice by trying to figure out where the funds should come. But what I will say is that we do need a lot more funding if we want to sustain the AI talent pipeline that will be needed to enforce, even if you think just about public employees that will need the right expertise to go and evaluate the claims that are being made about these AI systems.
Yeah.
Right now, we are not going to be producing enough AI talent in Canada if the universities don't have more funding to support that work.
And I guess I'm probably out of time. Just real quick, if there is that support from the Canadian public to actually fund that AI research and so forth, then would that put, I think, a better sense of responsibility on AI companies to perform properly to the conduct of the public? If that training and support is provided to give them the workforce that's necessary, then perhaps it gives us a little bit of a carrot-stick approach to ethical AI.
Yeah, I think the more clarity this bill brings, the more it's likely that it will support the AI system and the AI ecosystem in Canada. I know that we have lots of private sector sponsors at the Vector Institute, and one of the things that they mentioned to us is that they want more clarity because they're often smaller structures and they see a lot of penalties being described in the bill, but they want to be able to continue innovating in Canada and not being attracted to other countries where they have that clarity in terms of how to manage that risk in the longer term.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Massé. And just before we start the second round, colleagues, I have to get to the House to support and speak on a bill. And as such, I would ask unanimous consent to designate Brian Massey as our acting chair for the remainder of the meeting, if you don't mind. I see I have unanimous consent, so I leave you in the capable hands of MP Massé. And I'll just now yield the floor to Mr. Williams for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for our witnesses. Ms. Bednar, nice to see you again. Thank you for coming to the committee. I wanted to talk about two things with you, expanding on competition. One was that there was amendments, I don't know if you've seen them, from the minister, but it expanded the scope of the bill. And one of them was to add general purpose definitions for AI in the Act. Yeah. Really looking at is this really making this uncompetitive? And my second question is, we've had a witness at a previous meeting, Tom Bailey. He told the committee that there is a deliberate tactic by entrenched businesses to create regulatory capture, locking in regulatory model around their business and products and keeping out new competitors. Can you comment on both of those items when it relates to competition?
Sure. I mean, in terms of us being uncompetitive if we move forward with this legislation, I think there's a moment of competition in terms of policy design here, right? I think we should expect in the future that we'll see more policy harmonization or diffusion in the privacy space. And what we're seeing now is kind of this global federalist context where different jurisdictions, for a variety of reasons and in their various geopolitical contexts, as MP Rempel was pointing to, are putting forward very particular frameworks. In Canada, our federalism is typically a strength for our policy design. The worst thing we could do now is treat public policy as if we still carve it in stone, right? This is going to be a living document that we should be looking at and updating and upgrading, especially as this technology continues to improve. Back to the consent element we were just touching on. I mean, when the largest firms are saying that they're entitled to anything on the public web to inform their models and their business decisions, how can anyone else, how can any firm compete with that kind of policy? Finally, just very quickly, I mean, let's not treat privacy as if it's under or unregulated in our digital economy. The digital economy is highly regulated, mostly by private actors. On the regulatory capture element, always a concern in policy design if we're over listening to certain actors, of course, but as real as the problem of regulatory capture can be, I like to believe in my heart of hearts that all actors coming forward with ideas and concerns are doing so in the best possible spirit. I hope that's helpful for you.
Thank you, Ms. Bister. Mr. Chair, I'm going to cede the rest of my time to Ms. Yogeneru.
Merci, mon collègue, merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci au...
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witness, Mr. Clement, Mr. Patnaud. You probably haven't read all the evidence that we've heard before the committee since the beginning, but you spoke of consultation, that they administer 300 or so consultations, but mostly with business organizations. And many were saying that this was a badly drafted bill because there was no consultation, prior consultation, more diverse, with more diverse representation. Is this correct? This is what you said before.
Oui, la réponse est oui.
Monsieur Paperno, même chose.
Same thing for you, Mr. Patnaud? Well, consultation should continue once the law is in place, of course, to see what the difficulties would be in implementing the Act. Because technologies evolve very rapidly, and you'll have to keep up. Another issue that was raised quite consistently before the committee, that there are two parts to the law, if you will, artificial intelligence on the one hand, and privacy laws. One has to distinguish between the two, perhaps, but you did mention yourself, Mr. Parteneau, and also with comparisons with Europe, etc., perhaps we should take guidance from that. We've had some expertise come before the committee, such as yourself, and they gave us, more or less in a majority way, that there should have been prior consultations, far ahead of the consultations, because never have we seen one bill with these two chapters which are complementary but at the same time problematic. Mr. Clement, I think, mentioned that he would like to see this hived off. ADA should be distinct on AI, because it is, in fact, so specific and so crucial that we must have much, much broader consultations. Yes, artificial intelligence is only one way of analyzing data. There are many other ways of analyzing. And the respect of privacy legislation has to be considered separately and then applied. So the part of the law C-27 dealing with artificial intelligence talks a good game about protecting the privacy, but there's a lot of detours too.
Merci.
For Monsieur Clemens, maybe?
Yep.
Yes, well, I've said that consultation is sadly very short supply around ADA, and a lot of the problems that I think we see in ADA would have been addressed if people had been able to, from a variety of perspectives, come in and present that. So what you do now, separating it, I think, would help. Whether it can be amended, I don't know. That's not for me. But at this point, I think if it does get passed, we should build into it a review process so that in an ongoing way, we can provide a broad-based updating of it.
Okay.
As others have said.
Thank you very much. And now I'm moving to Ms. Lapointe with regards to 5 minutes. Thanks.
I'd like to congratulate Mr. Garon for defending his bill this afternoon.
So on Monday, we heard from Gillian Hatfield, who's the chair of the Schwartz-Reisman Institute. And in her testimony here at the committee, she said that the legislation is concerned and actually does a lot to address individual harms. But she also suggested that the legislation doesn't adequately address harms or risk on a systemic level. And for example, trading on our financial markets. So the question I would have for you is how does the introduction of AI into these systems impact our ability to control and to also ensure reliability of our financial markets or protect against antitrust behavior, maintain trust in our judicial systems?
So I don't have expertise in the financial markets. What I'll tell you is in terms of the transparency that AI systems lack. And so it's very difficult to understand how AI systems arrive at specific predictions from the data that they train from. So it would be very difficult to understand how they have extracted patterns in historical financial data, for instance, to make the predictions that they make on the current market. So that's probably the main problem. And the additional issue that I see is that you're going to have to provide some understanding to humans as to how these AI systems are making their predictions. And again, there's a very difficult open problem to solve before we arrive at technology that is capable of doing that. And we risk seeing something that is similar to sort of how we have greenwashing. We can have similar issues in AI systems where the way that their predictions are justified can be disconnected from the way that the predictions are actually made by the AI systems. And so that can lead to misleading claims about them not being biased or so on. And so I would think those two aspects are relevant to the financial markets in particular.
And can you offer the committee your expert opinion on legislating these systemic harms in a manner that can keep up with the technology? And so should the onus be on technology design and developers?
I think what's important is to have a conversation that I think one example that comes to mind is the aerospace industry, where there's really a thorough process for surfacing errors that are being sort of encountered in deployment. And this is what we're missing for the AI industry, is to have a very clear protocol as to how we should surface bugs in the algorithms as they occur, so that we can then figure out the solutions as engineers, but also implement the right legislation to support these solutions. And that's something that I would leave to you to see how we could draw inspiration from these regulated sectors like the aerospace industry.
See, Mr. Clement has his hand up. Could we get him in on? And I'll give you a minute of my time coming up.
Yes. Sorry. This is, I think, a really crucial issue. We've heard that AI systems are unpredictable in their behavior, and also that they're not, we can't understand or we can't explain how they've come up with those. So those are two big problems. And so I think in addition to having conversations and being open about this, there needs to be, we need to apply a sort of precautionary principle and an accountability principle so that organizations that put them into play are accountable and have to take prior steps before they start experimenting on us. The aerospace industry has these well worked out systems because when a plane comes down, everybody knows about it. And that's dreadful. But when an AI, complicated, doesn't have to be AI system, and a complicated digital system, network system goes wrong, the problems are distributed and it's very difficult to analyze. So it's in a worse situation, I think, even than aerospace.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Papineau, we've already seen many privacy breaches with online systems. And what should we know about the escalation of these types of breaches based on your extensive work in both the privacy and the security and machine learning?
What do you mean by the escalation?
The escalation of the types of breaches that we're seeing.
I see. Well, again, it goes back to my point about the issue with putting the emphasis on the specific pieces of data that are being leaked versus how that data is analyzed. Because as more and more data leaks are happening, what this means is that malicious individuals have access to more and more information about individuals that they can go and find online through these data leaks. And so that what that means is that it makes it easier for them to go and re-identify people from data that has been protected through de-identification. Whereas if instead we focus on the algorithms that are being used to analyze this data, then we can ensure that the output of the analysis is not going to leak additional information about the individuals. And that is how we will control sort of how much information is available about individuals to malicious entities. Again, it's really about changing the focus from trying to modify the data itself to how we analyze the data.
Thank you. Sorry you're out of time. I gave you some of my time as well, too. And Mr. Garano has been very patient and also especially an exciting day. Congratulations again on your bill passing in the chamber. No small feat.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask my questions of you, Mr. Bernard. A few years back, we were told that we have many benefits from less regulation, obviously from monopolistic companies, and the antitrust laws, of course, came into effect, and consumer protection legislation. Now, in this sector, AI, which is expanding exponentially, we do need a framework, do we not, so that the sector will work?
Market. Des réglementations.
Regulation would work better for AI to work. Do you think that the market itself, the rules of the market, the industry is best placed to be self-regulating in this context? Do you think we're at a stage in the development of AI that regulation, if we take a look at it from a historical point of view, is just as important today as the antitrust laws were required a few decades back?
Madame Bednar?
Sit you.
Sorry, I was just listening to the translation. No, I'm not in favor of prolonged self-regulation. You know, much of the regulatory lag that we've seen is a product of the late 1990s U.S. approach, which is famously referred to as permissionless innovation, where we, took a step back, and I think Canada had a little bit of an echo there. I understand that firms often have their own kind of policies, lowercase p, and practices in place. But now it's time for Canada to formalize just where that bar is set and continue to learn from both the private sector, large businesses, small businesses, and of course a range of actors from civil society and academics on how
Professeur Bernard, je vous interromps parce que le temps se fait très rare.
I'm going to interrupt you. The chair is very generous, but still time is limited. Do you think in its current form this law is too permissive as to the concept of self-regulation? Should we not depend on and impose government regulation?
Being a massive piece of legislation, it prevents pure self-regulation through firms. It does ask firms to comply in particular ways. That does cost firms and have some cost associated with these new norms. But I don't think that it puts forward or enshrines pure self-regulation when it comes to privacy and the use of data.
Thank you very much. Moving now to Mr. Genereux, you have the rest of the remaining of the time here, which is about 3.5 minutes of the committee time.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to the questions on the bill. Mr. Paperno, a lot of people came here to tell us that they had not been consulted prior to the tabling of the bill, and that the minister, of course, bragged that he met with over 300 organizations, consultations. One witness, whose name escapes me, was head of a women's rights group. And when Ms. Garner spoke earlier about these fake images, the distribution or diffusion of fake images, the bill that we have in its form today, would it allow us to truly protect women with its current wording and formulation? Now, Taylor Swift, of course, has been harassed with these false images. Does this bill protect women? Well, you have to consult with people who are, in fact, affected by the results of this use of AI. So there are risks, but I can't comment on it. Mr. Clement, do you have an opinion on that?
I would repeat that you have to talk to the people who are affected. I believe it was a person from LEAF, L-E-A-F, who made that earlier remark. But I don't see personally that this bill would provide that, and it hasn't been something that would be really had thought of anticipated in this of having a particular way for groups who are affected to be able to register their concerns.
Merci. Je vais laisser mon temps à Monsieur Vice.
Thank you. I'll give the rest of my time to my colleague.
Then, Mr. Papernaut, the bill does not prohibit the government to ban an AI system that may cause harm. The bill does contain monetary penalties. Do you think we need to consider putting in a power for either the commissioner or the minister to ban certain AI systems when proven to be detrimental both to Canadian society or individuals? Thank you.
I think it's more important to think about how we can support responsible AI than to focus too much on the penalties, because there are socially beneficial applications of AI, and openness in science has led to a lot of improvements in AI and how responsible it is. So I would focus on that aspect in particular. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And with that, committee members, wraps up our first session. I want to thank the online witnesses for participating, and as well as our witness here as well. We'll briefly suspend until it gets set up for the next hour. Thank you. Okay. Colleagues, I ask you to take your seats. We're going to get started. We have till 8 o'clock. So I want to persistent to motion adopted November 7th. The committee is resuming consideration of the study of recent investigation and reports on Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I'd like to welcome our witness today, Ms. Lawrence, former President and Chief Executive Officer of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Ms. Lawrence, as you know, you have 5 minutes for an opening statement, and please begin. And thank you again for coming to the committee here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, honourable members, or I guess good evening. As said, my name is Leah Lawrence, and I'm the former President and CEO of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I served there from 2015 to 2023. When I started at SDTC, it was on the brink of shutdown, but I was able to put in place a team that transformed the organization. We took it from being consistently 20% over budget to under budget. We were formally commended by the Auditor General of Canada and the Treasury Board Secretariat for our increased flexibility, our diverse funding streams, and overhead costs that were half of those of comparable federal programs. Given this, ISED increased SDTC's funding during my tenure by over 200%. Over the last year, I spent a lot of time responding to various inquiries as a result of the actions of a whistleblower. This and the resulting media attention took a big toll on me and the organization. I felt that my leadership had become a distraction that would prevent SDTC, an organization that I had dedicated myself to for over 8 years, from fulfilling its mandate. And so, despite having the continued confidence of SDTC's board of directors, I resigned. I note that in resigning, I received no severance, and because SDTC's employees are not civil servants, no government pension. I decided to resign 2 days after appearing before the House of Commons Ethics Committee, after I listened in disbelief to ISED CFO Doug McConaughey testifying on the same panel. He told the committee he had spent 30 hours talking to SDTC's whistleblower, speculating, as evidenced by recordings obtained by media, on the outcomes of the various investigations underway, while they were still ongoing, including saying that these investigations, quote, could have been done in a way that exonerated the board and scapegoated Leah. As the ISED overseer of the investigation, Mr. McConaughey's actions were unethical and compromised the investigation. Yet, despite his actions, the investigation still found no wrongdoing or misconduct and made several administrative recommendations that the team and I were implementing when I decided to resign. But I'm here today to talk primarily about governance and conflict of interest. The SDTC Act and the Government of Canada set the public policy framework. The Board of Directors sets the governance framework. In the case of SDTC, half of the board is appointed by the Government of Canada. Also, an Assistant Deputy Minister from ISED attends all board meetings and is privy to all materials. That includes all funding recommendations and all discussions of conflict of interest. The CEO's and the management's job is to take that policy direction from the government and the governance direction from the board and turn it into operating practices for the organization. I note the board also approves all project funding. From 2015 to 2019, I did a lot of work on governance reform with the previous chair and the chair of governance, Jim Balsillie and Gary Lunn. A key change to harmonize the conflict of interest rules for our two categories of board members, including limiting and eliminating direct conflicts and implanting cooling off periods, was blocked when a non-government appointee got a ruling from the Ethics Commissioner they did not need to follow the same governance standards as government appointees. This made it impossible for management to hold all board members to the same rules. Early in 2019, it became very apparent to me that the government wanted to replace the chair of the board. In May or June of 2019, I was informed by ISID's official representative, ADM Andy Noseworthy, that Ms. Annette Verschuren was going to be appointed to replace Mr. Balsillie. I expressed concern. SDTC was funding a project for her company. I expressed concern there was a potential for both conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest. I expressed concern that Ms. Verschuren and SDTC could potentially be damaged by the appointment. In the days that followed, our government relations lead contacted the minister's staff to reiterate our concerns about Ms. Verschuren's appointment, noting no previous chair had direct or perceived conflicts of interest, and further, it was previously a condition of the chair's appointment to be conflict-free. ADM Noseworthy has subsequently told me that in absence of a written policy explicitly prohibiting a beneficiary of funds from becoming chair, that the appointment would go ahead. I fear that my ongoing efforts to continue to strengthen the governance regime at the board level were largely stymied from that point on. Henceforth, it became largely an exercise in managed conflict rather than precluding or eliminating conflict. I did continue to work on governance reform with legal advisors and was pleased when the board finally adopted a policy of post-directorship cooling-off periods and hired a board ethics advisor. These are good developments. However, they're not enough. Another important reform remains outstanding, that any appointee to the board be free of conflict of interest. My second recommendation is that the Treasury Board Secretariat convene a group of chairs and CEOs from the many independent agencies that provide funds on behalf of the government and ask them what support they need to discharge their mandates from a governance and public accountability point of view. In closing, independent government-funded organizations like SDTC play an important role. They have access to people and resources that government does not, and can deliver on outcomes that complement and support government policy. The action plan that ISID has required of SDTC, and which they've implemented, does not address the matters of governance and conflict of interest that I've raised here today, and that I've advocated for throughout my time at SDTC. I thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence. And my first is to Mr. Perkins, but also welcome Mr. Barrett as well. So, Mr. Perkins, you have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence, for being here. I appreciate it, and we all appreciate you coming. We know it's probably been a very challenging time for you, and appreciate your willingness to come here and speak of it. You mentioned in your opening statement about the period of time where there was a change in the chair. So maybe if I could start there. You were originally hired by the newly appointed at the time Chair Jim Balsillie to clean up some of the governance practices and management practices at the place. And in 2017 or so, these internal reports were done by Treasury Board and the Auditor General. I think you said that gave SDTC a clean bill of health on all these things that you had fixed. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Auditor General's report was in 2017, and I believe just after that, the Treasury Board Secretariat report was completed.
So it would seem to me that with all of that going on, it would seem like shortly thereafter it would be an odd time to change the chair unless the chair requested that. Did in the time where that was going on, and Mr. Basile's not a shy guy, he speaks publicly on a lot of issues and has for a long time as one of the co-founders of one of Canada's most iconic companies. Did the minister's office or anyone at the political level ever contact you and express concern about what he was saying publicly while chair of SDTC?
In particular, in the time period probably in 2018 and into early 2019, there would be several moments when it was raised with me or with my team that there was concerns about public statements that Mr. Balsillie was making as an individual. At the time, there was a consultation underway on data and digital legislation, and of course, this is an area he's expert in, and he would make critiques of that legislation and provide input in his role as an individual. But often those statements, and in the aftermath of those statements, we would get calls asking about why he was making statements.
Who would you get those calls from?
In general, one occurrence happened with the Associate Deputy Minister when I was in a meeting on another thing. I was asked, should he continue as chair, and was this a thing to continue? And the second instances would be really at the working level when mid-level people would call our team of government relations.
Did that ever get communicated to you as a reason why there would be a change in the chair?
It was clear that there was evident discomfort and that they were actively looking for another chair. It's my understanding, although I was not privy to the conversations with Mr. Balsillie in the minister's office, that he wanted to continue and he communicated that to them. But around May 2019, June 2019, I was informed that there were two candidates that they'd like me to talk to as potential candidates for the board chair, and one of them was Ms. Verschuren.
Who informed you of that?
Minister Baines actually asked me to speak to those two potential candidates, and I did. And when I spoke to Ms. Verschuren, I asked her to speak to the Ethics Commissioner. This was well in advance of her appointment, indicating that I thought it was important that she talk to them about her direct conflicts. At the time, SDTC had a contract with her company, and this was well known. It was public information. It's posted both on SDTC's website and, of course, on Ms. Verschuren's company's website.
So, and according to your opening statement, after you, I'm assuming after, based on what you just said, after Minister Baines suggested she would be a good replacement, how many days did it take between when that happened, you did the review, and Mr. Balsillie was switched to Ms. Verschuren?
Yeah, it was about probably 2, maybe 3 weeks later when I got a call from ADM Noseworthy telling me that Ms. Verschuren would be the new chair. When I raised the concerns again, and he told me that without a policy it would continue, it happened. And so I think it was June 19th that she was appointed. And I actually was the one who called Mr. Balsillie to tell him that he was no longer chair, and she was chairing a meeting 3 days later.
So this is where this idea of managed conflict comes from, that somehow you could manage the conflict that the government was aware of when they appointed her?
Well, I have to say that the management team has to put in place policies and procedures that are required when they are following the direction of the board and or the government when they have an appointee who has a direct conflict. So yes, now we're in a position of direct conflict where you have to have a disclosure, which we did have before, but it did not have a chair's name on it with a direct conflict. And then you have to make sure that you are following the procedures very closely.
But I'm not understanding whether you had a policy or not, which seemed to be the issue, saying you didn't have a policy on conflict, so it was okay to have conflicts. When the SDTC Act itself in Clause 16.2 states that no member should profit or gain any income from the foundation of the activities. Clearly, the Associate Deputy, the Deputy, and Minister Baines in making that appointment must have been aware of that. And if they weren't aware of that, they must have been aware of Section 4 of the Public Office Holder Act, which says that in the exercise of their duty that no public office holder shall further their private interests of those of their family and friends. They must have been aware of that, regardless of whether or not you had a corporate governance policy on it, that they were breaking those acts by doing this.
I was never asked about any of those things, and I do not know if they reviewed those before making the appointment.
I have about another 30 seconds.
Okay, so can you just explain to me again, and for everybody that's watching, what a managed conflict means? Because any board I've served on, and I've served on a number, you don't go on a board, first of all, if you have a conflict and you're doing business with that organization. That's just normal corporate and individual ethics. You don't do that. And secondly, if you are on a board and a conflict comes, you choose probably to leave that board if that conflict more important to your business interest than being on the board, you make a choice. But in this case, it doesn't seem like managed conflict means that. It means you can have your cake and eat it too, it seems.
Well, I can't speak for the board members. I can tell you what the process is. They have to declare their conflicts. Conflicts are talked about at the beginning of every meeting. When a conflict has been declared, they are required, they do not receive the materials related to that conflict. They have to leave the meeting as part of the conflict of interest policy when anything related to their declared conflicts is discussed. And that's how it had to be managed once people had conflicts declared.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. And I now need to move to Mr. Van Bynen, who's been patiently waiting online since the start of the meeting. Mr. Van Bynen, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the ongoing work and the investigations from the Office of the Auditor General, the Ethics Commissioner, in addition to the law firm that's looking into the HR concerns. You also appeared before the Ethics Committee on November the 8th. My question is, why did you request to be reinvited to this committee when there's so much ongoing work to get to the bottom of these issues raised by the whistleblowers at SDTC?
Well, first of all, I will say that I did speak to the Auditor General this week, and I am participating in all of those processes, even though I'm an individual and no longer employed by SDTC. I requested to come here because I thought it needed to be known that myself and SDTC's team did try to raise the concern that a chair appointed with a direct conflict would cause potential damage to both SDTC and to Ms. Verschuren.
So can you tell me, you've had the concern, you've referenced the concern a number of times, and a few times I've heard the phrase that these were known conflicts. So can you tell me what you did with these known concerns? Were they documented? Were they highlighted? Were the discussions, at least, is there evidence of those discussions within the records of the corporation that we can use to verify those things?
So I was giving the advice that I thought would be taken, and that would be common sense, which would be that a person with a direct conflict would potentially damage the organization of SDTC if they became chair. So my advice is not in writing, but I do believe that there were conversations at the ministerial level, and there may be things in writing between my team and the minister's office staff. So you'd have to ask SDTC if there's those kinds of exchanges.
So there could be documentation that could be made available as part of resolving the issue. Well, that's good to know. And if you could give us some indication as to where those documents might be found to assist in the review, that would certainly be appreciated as well. When reflecting on what came to light from the fact-finding mission, what did you learn, and what are the things that you would have done differently now in hindsight?
Well, I think that the fact-finding mission had some recommendations related to administration and governance. That's another reason why I came here today to speak to some of those, because in my view, as I said in my opening statement, the ISID implementation plan actually does not cover some of the governance issues that need to be addressed. With respect to the administrative issues and their implementation, I was involved in launching those before my resignation, and it's my understanding that SDTC has filed with ISID the conclusion of that implementation, and they're waiting for feedback back on those.
Okay, I'd like to go back to Mr. Perkins' comments where he said that if it's not written in your charter or your operating documents that it shouldn't happen, that things shouldn't happen, that these things can happen. When does it become, I guess, an evaluation of things being unethical, as opposed to looking for a document that says it's okay, but you know from the values that you've learned in business that it's not the right thing? When does that override the strict adherence to documentation?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't think strict adherence to documentation should override direct conflicts.
But it sounds to me like that's what was brought forward, where you had indicated that there was a conflict that you felt was a problem. How you made that known is still to be determined. And then the response that you received is that there's nothing to stop that from happening. When do we say there may be nothing that says that shouldn't happen, but ethically it should not happen. When do we get into those discussions, and were there discussions like that?
Yes, as I said in my opening statement, I raised concerns that she had a direct conflict, that she had a contract with the organization. I raised concerns that there would be perceived and direct conflict problems to manage. But once the minister makes an appointment, once we're instructed by the department to implement, we have to put in place a process and procedure and the ethics commissioner okays it as well. We have to put in place a process and a procedure to manage. So the manage is that we would send out, there's a declared standing conflict. I think Ms. Verschuren talked about that. The second piece is on circulation before each meeting. There would be any new companies put forward. Board members will respond to that, and then it would be discussed and in the board minutes for every meeting who had declared a conflict and what the nature of that conflict was. And in the case where recusal was required, the individual would leave the meeting when a particular item was discussed.
But as I understand it, the minutes didn't necessarily reflect that. Is that correct?
This was one of the findings, that minutes required to have more clear documentation of these matters. The materials, though, had clear statements that were circulated and in the board packages.
Okay, when you became aware of the allegation raised by the whistleblowers, what was your organization's initial plan and reaction to address this?
The whistleblower made their complaint to the board of directors. The complaint included both my allegations against myself as well as the chair. So we were immediately told that we would not be part of the investigation, that we would be asked to speak to them at the appropriate time. The board, is my understanding, put in place a special committee to investigate the whistleblower complaint. They hired a third-party law firm to review, and they worked with that law firm to produce a report. That law firm pulled tens of thousands of documents from our ITIM team. They used their artificial intelligence to review, and they did just less than 30 hours of interviews of staff. So that was what happened when the complaint was received by the whistleblower.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Van Bonen, your time is up.
Thank you.
I have to move to
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Guerin. Thank you, sir. Please, you have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Lawrence. Bienvenue au comité.
Thank you very much. Thank you for appearing before the committee, Ms. Lawrence, and take the time to answer your questions. We're in a world where perceptions are just as important as actual conflicts of interest. We understand that SDST grants funding to third parties. And that's a legitimate activity, of course. But in the case of Ms. Van Schuven, has accepted the chairmanship of the board and was receiving monies, that there's been some legal advice that was sought and obtained. On the one hand, it was stated that it was not explicitly illegal, but the ethics were very cloudy. So in such a situation, should one not take a step back, not accept the position, or decline the funds?
Directors have declined the funds once they had been appointed. Is that correct?
Ou refuser la présidence.
Well, either or, decline the position or decline the funds.
When I spoke to Ms. Verschuren and when I spoke to Assistant Deputy Minister Andrew Noseworthy, this was why I raised the concern that her coming forward to be chair had a real and perceived conflict of interest. I had thought that they would advise her of those concerns and that the Ethics Commissioner would also give her more strict guidance. This did not happen, but I agree with you, sir. I would have expected something greater.
Parce que quand on nous dit...
Well, when you seek legal advice, knowing that the ethical question was quite serious, and your legal advice said there's no illegality here, so perhaps you should be reviewing the mandate and the terms of reference of the organization, the STSD.
review the Act. The SDTC Act states within it that they would like to have people who have deep expertise in the area. At the time SDTC was created was 20 years ago. And at that time, there was a very narrow group of individuals who might be applicable to be appointed to the board of directors. Today, it's a much broader pool, and I think that you could have a much higher bar of conflict of interest like you're speaking about. And that would be something I think that the committee could consider and recommend in terms of act change.
Mais malgré le fait que la loi...
Despite the fact that the law, the act itself may be a little bit dated and the situation of it netted, like you say, a water pool, boards of governors are usually appointed by government and GICs. And the government has to be aware of the changes in the environment and the economy as well. In response to Mr. Vieux, it's very difficult to obtain a completely conflict-free board. So I think that she had already previously received funds, this individual. Why did the government persist in naming her nonetheless to the chairmanship of the board?
Decision-making, what I know is I recommended against the appointment and I raised the concerns.
Pensez-vous, donc je vais vous poser une question purement factuelle.
Okay, now, based on fact, do you think that anywhere in Canada that one would hire somebody that is so superior in competency that she could have been hired and not be in a conflict of interest?
Did not have conflicts of interest, so I do think that there's a broad candidate pool that could have been chosen from that did not have direct conflicts of interest.
Je comprends.
That's clear.
Madame Verschuren serait...
That she would often, we were told that she would recuse herself from issues when certain items were being discussed, dealing with her organization. If someone recuses themselves and absents himself from a meeting, now that person is still in a position of authority and continues to do so once that discussion is finished.
I think you're...
Donc, je vous la pose.
No, I'd like... You have a board. There's a person that may be in a conflict of interest. You indicate that, or you ask that person to recuse themselves. Now, do you think the conflict goes out the door along with the individual?
Situation where you have a power structure of a chair or directors that have particular conflicts, that the best you can do in this situation is do exactly that, have them leave the room. But obviously, the perception is strong, even if they hold the highest standards and do not discuss the activities that they should have recused themselves from. And I think that's one of the reasons we find ourselves here today, is that even if they held the highest possible standard, and I did not see any situations where they did talk about things conflicted outside of the meeting rooms, but even if they did hold that high standard, the perception is strong that they may have.
Merci.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Guerin, and thank you. Next is welcome to Mr. Barrett, and you have 5 minutes, sir.
You made Assistant Deputy Minister Andrew Noseworthy aware of the conflicts of interest and problems in appointing Ms. Annette Verschuren as chair of the board in advance of her appointment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Noseworthy was aware that by appointing her, ISED was violating their own contribution agreement with Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Is that correct?
I would have thought he would have known that, given that he is overseeing the organization and he knows what the Act and the contribution agreement say.
Can you confirm that you had your staff contact the minister's office to raise your concerns about this appointment?
Yes, we had several discussions at the staff level, and so there were bilateral discussions with the minister's office, and it was told to the minister's office that the previous chair had not had conflicts, and that in fact, in our knowledge, there had never been a chair with a company that was being funded by SDTC.
And what was the year that this appointment was happening, and who was the minister?
June 2019, and the minister was Minister Navdeep Bains.
So 2019, the Trudeau government went ahead with the appointment after you had raised concerns with the minister about the conflict.
That's correct.
So the Minister of Innovation, personally aware of serious problems with appointing Annette Verschaeren, but did it anyway. I'm asking for a third time because this is surprising.
Mr. Bains did not tell me directly. I did not communicate him with directly, but Ms. Verschuren has said that she's talked to Mr. Bains 3 times before she agreed, and she said that he did know that she had the direct conflict.
Why do you believe that the Liberal government and the Minister for Innovation were so focused on appointing Ms. Verschaeren?
I don't have direct knowledge of what their concerns were, but I do know that they had concerns about his discussions publicly on other government legislation and policy that were ongoing.
Sorry, their concerns with whom?
With digital and data consultations that were ongoing at the time.
So I understand why. So I understand why you believe they wanted to replace the former chair. Why do you believe they were determined to replace the former chair with a chair that had been identified as being in conflict? Why was it so important to pick her?
I don't know. In fact, at the time that I was informed that they were going to replace the chair, I was asked by Minister Bains to speak to 2 candidates. I did speak to 2 candidates. The other one declined to put their name forward.
Did that candidate have a conflict of interest?
They did not, but they were concerned that they may invest in the sector in the future, and so that therefore they felt that they should not put their name forward.
Okay, I don't have a lot of time, but I just, it's really important to understand. There was a conflict that the board chair that they'd put forward to appoint that she was in, because she had an interest in companies that had received money from SDTC. Is that correct?
Her company had a contract with SDTC at the time of her appointment.
Right. So a conflict before taking the position, and is now under investigation by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner for taking or directing funds from SDTC and voting for it for a company that she had an interest in. You're aware that that's the case as well?
I understand those investigations are ongoing, yes.
Do you know how often Annette Verschaeren was in contact with the minister at ISED?
With the most recent minister, I believe she, as far as I know, she only met with him twice, one at an announcement and one at a summit, once at a summit.
Did she deal with the deputy minister?
I believe they had ongoing dialogues, yes.
And who was the deputy minister that she would have been communicating with?
Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy.
How often would she have dealt with Mr. Kennedy?
I couldn't say.
More than 10 times?
I don't know. Whenever an issue would have come up that would have pertained to SCTC, so contribution agreements, encouragement of change in acts, those kinds of things.
And who acted as the liaison between SDTC and ISED?
At that level, she contacted the deputy minister directly. At my level, I dealt almost exclusively with Andy Noseworthy.
Did Vina Bulhar,
yeah,
fill that role, or Amber Batul?
So Vina Bulhar was our government relations lead, and at some points Amber Batul would have had communications with the minister's office. It would have been at the policy chief level, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. Thank you, and over to Ms. Lapointe. You have 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Lawrence, one of my learnings in organizational excellence is that you could have the best of policies written, but if they're not followed and if there's not a mechanism to monitor and check to see if they're being followed, then those policies don't carry much weight. So can you talk to the committee about the official ethics guidelines that your organization was expected to follow, and also the processes and the mechanisms that were in place to ensure that those guidelines were properly followed, both by the board and by employees?
And by the
employees.
Yes, thank you. So two things. Three things probably. When I started at SDTC in 2015, I was surprised to find that the conflict of interest policy for the employees and the board was actually the same. That's to say that employees actually were allowed at that point to have direct conflicts of interest. So one of my first acts as CEO was to separate those two policies and ensure that there were no direct conflicts for employees. And that continues to this date. With respect to board of directors, all a CEO can do is advise. And so the ethics policy for the board of directors had always had the ability to, for a board member to have conflicts. At the time I was appointed, most of the GIC appointees did not, but it had been longstanding practice that the non-government appointees had managed conflict, as we've been talking about earlier. So the process in place is as follows. When we're going into an investment committee round, there is before we go into an investment committee round, there are standing conflicts when people are appointed that are managed and are always looked at by the investment vice president and director when we're going into a round. The next thing that happens is there is a circulation well in advance of the meeting for boards of directors to declare both if they have a conflict or perceived conflict with a potential recipient of funds and also consortium partners related to them. That has to be received back before the board members will receive any of the materials. If they declare a conflict, they do not receive the materials related to that declared conflict in the board package. Then at the meeting, the chair would then as well in the board package, all of the the declarations are summarized, and the chair would then call for any additions or any changes at the board meeting. And then anybody who perhaps became aware of something between those dates could raise it at that time. So that's the process. The idea is then that these things would be minuted and followed up on as the case may be. So that's the process. It was followed in most cases, and this was the managed conflict that we had in place.
So I appreciate that that was the policy or the expected practice, but and employees would need to recuse themselves, or board members, and they would need to discuss conflicts at the beginning of each meeting. But I believe that the RCGT report clearly said that that didn't happen. So that's that adherence piece where it may be written, but in practice, did that happen? And the report indicates that it didn't. So could you expand on that for the committee?
I believe that SCTC filed with the Ethics Committee and perhaps this one that this process is filed, that the minutes maybe didn't reflect it in an appropriate way is the problem. But this process is and was followed.
Okay. And what would be the role of the CEO in a situation where a board member doesn't recuse himself or doesn't declare a conflict of interest at that point?
So the role of the CEO is to work very closely with the governance chair. And from 2015 to 2019, when Gary Lunn was the governance chair, we did that very actively. In that time, it was an easier time because, as was stated, we didn't have as many direct conflicts as we had after the chair's Annette Verschuren's appointment. And so he and I would work together to approach board members to talk to them about perceived and real conflicts. Because of his gravitas as a former minister of the Crown, that often carried the day and always actually carried the day. Once he was gone and once we had a very different operating environment related to direct conflict with Annette Verschuren's appointment, at that point, all the CEO can do and the Vice President of Investment can do is recommend. But in most cases, what would happen is the director would ask that the adjudication go to the committee. And so or the committee chair. And so in some cases, if we felt strongly that it needs to be adjudicated before the committee, as in if it was a direct conflict, we would engage the committee chair. In other cases where it was a perceived conflict, it would get discussed directly at committee.
Thank you very much. Now I need to move to Mr. Garand for 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le...
Thank you very much, Chair. It might be important to bring some changes to the law eventually, but in real time, in order to ensure the confidence and trust of the public, what can we do to improve governance and the perception of that governance of the SDCC?
First and foremost, I understand right now that the Government of Canada is going to be looking at appointing new board members because there are some that will be retiring. I think what's important and must be done is that those new board members have no conflict of interest. And that would be the one and first recommendation I would make.
Je vous interromps. Et c'est possible de...
And would it be possible to find adequate board members?
The second thing I would say is that the Auditor General, I signed off on the Auditor General review that was mentioned earlier. It was one of the last things I did before resigning from SDTC. I think that review will be very important. It will help bring together some of the threads in terms of the various agencies, actors, and individuals, and what their roles and responsibilities should be in this kind of a governance model.
Et une question un peu en rafale.
Well, perhaps a few quick questions. What legislative changes might be made in order to improve the situation? And if you can't give us a list of things that could be done, recommendations to amendments, what would be your recommendations to make some immediate changes, eventually followed by legislation, so that we don't get a repeat performance of this nature?
To follow up with that kind of information. And I know as well SDTC's staff in negotiating contribution 8 and 9 proposed such amendments to ISED as well, so they would be able to provide that information to you as well.
Thank you.
Merci.
Perkins for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I have this right so far, 2018, 2019, the former chair, Jim Basili, is speaking out publicly against the lack of movement of the government on its digital privacy policy. The government expresses concern to you as chair that he would be doing that and still be in this role. Shortly thereafter, the minister phones you and says, we're going to change the chair. Here's 2 names. You express reservations about one of them who had a clear conflict of interest. The government, Minister Baines, and the governor and council, the cabinet, appoints her to this job anyway, knowing they have a conflict of interest. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and the person that is the constant contact for you as CEO, back and forth to the ministry for you personally as a CEO, was ADM Noseworthy. Is that correct?
I believe from 2018 on, yes.
And so ADM Noseworthy said before this committee that he didn't recall any discussions of conflicts of interest around these. Do you believe that to be a true statement?
Well, what I know is that the materials were circulated to ADM Noseworthy and his team before every meeting. I know that conflict was discussed at every meeting, and in my recollection, Mr. Noseworthy was in those meetings.
So before this committee, Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy said that he was not aware of any of the conflicts until the whistleblower came to him in 2023. Do you think it's possible for the minister's office to appoint somebody when they've been notified of a conflict by the associate deputy minister, who presumably reports to the deputy minister talking to the minister, that the deputy minister could claim he didn't know about these conflicts? Does that make any sense to you?
I can't speak to Deputy Minister Kennedy because he was not the deputy at the time of Annette's appointment. That happened after.
So who was?
John Nubley.
And would you have expected him to have known about this?
I would have expected that public information and some research would have done before candidates were spoken with, yes.
You mentioned that your government relations lead was in contact with the minister's office about these conflicts. Who is that?
Vina Bular.
And was this all verbal, or did she also communicate it in writing?
I don't know if she communicated in writing. SDTC would have to bring forward any information if she did.
Mr. Chair, I would ask that the committee request any emails from this individual to the minister's office or to the deputy minister concerning these conflicts, if there are any.
Okay, thank you. Well noted.
This idea of managed conflicts, did it change the tone in the board of how, from what you experienced previously under Mr. Basili to how board members dealt with their conflicts in proposals that came forward, whether it was the COVID relief money or whether it was at least two, Andre Lise-Miteau, Stephen Kucher, who subsequently had projects approved that SDTC funded that they had financial interests in. Was this a managed conflict that seemed okay because the board had set out that that was okay? Or did they say, oh, no, we don't think this is appropriate behavior, so we'll either make a choice between being on the board or having our financial interests benefit?
Well, I can give you an specific example where there was a board member pre-2019 where Mr. Lunn and I spoke to them about a potential conflict they had as a consultant with an organization. They stepped back from an organization and recused themselves. Later, after Mr. Lunn was gone and after Ms. Verschuren was appointed, about a year after she was appointed, that individual came back and said, well, given that direct conflicts are now allowed, I'm going to go on the board of this organization that was a funded company.
And who was that?
That was Guy Ouimet.
Okay. And he appeared before this committee, admitted he had a $4 million project that got funded while he was on the board. Did the any member, did Ms. Vacherian approach any management to lobby them on behalf of money for the Vacherian Center?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. We have emails from your Chief Investment Officer, VP, that confirm he did and that he approved the fast tracking of that consideration. Those were given to us by the whistleblower. Would that surprise you?
Well, the fast track, this is a bit technical, excuse me, but the fast track would be that if
she had requested it, as in the email.
Well, I would have to look at the email, but a fast track is a thing that is
okay. I don't need the fast track explanation. I don't need that. Is there any director who left the board after the cooling off period policy was passed that contacted the board to lobby on behalf of a company they were involved in or employed in for money from SDTC against the policy of the board?
There was an instance where a board member left the board, and Ms. Verschuren, I asked Ms. Verschuren to write him a letter saying that he could not apply from the perspective of the company that he currently worked for.
But that board member was calling and applying.
They were part of an application that they wanted to put forward, and we had to remind him that the cooling off period had been passed. Jeff Cape.
So he actually went to be CEO of this company after leaving the board, and within the 1 year cooling off period was trying to get money from the board.
Yes, I believe he told the committee he thought it didn't apply to him because they had applied before that he became CEO.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, that's your time. I know the clock is a little fast in the corner over there, but you will have your full 5 minutes, Mr. Sorbera, to take the committee home.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Ms. Lawrence, to the committee. I'd like to start off with just a few things that I've written down here. During your tenure, you said that employees would recuse themselves or they would discuss conflicts at the beginning of each meeting.
Directors are not employees.
Sorry, directors, yes,
yeah.
Directors. Directors would recuse themselves or discuss conflicts at the beginning. And you can correct me if I get details wrong.
Apologize.
No, please. And also that you acknowledge that the RCGT report clearly said that did not happen. Can you expand on that point or the thought I've put out there?
So is the question, did they actually recuse themselves?
No, why they didn't recuse themselves and why in the report saying that it did not happen if you've indicated that that was supposed to happen at the beginning of each meeting.
Yeah, so I believe this was filed with the committees by SDTC in terms of response to the RCGT report. They did recuse, they did leave the meetings. What happened is the minutes didn't properly reflect that.
And your role, your role as CEO during those situations, you would have raised these issues at board meetings if there was a conflict that the individuals should be leaving?
They did leave. That's what happened.
Okay. And then next question, I sat in the ethics, sat on the ethics committee in prior Parliament. I do not on this session, but it was indicated to you that while you were testified at the ethics committee, that the opposition members referred to the actions taken by you while CEO as criminality, fraud, and forgery on the Canadian taxpayer, and they went on to say that this warrants a police investigation. How do you respond to such accusations from the opposition members? I've read your bio, and you were CEO for 7 years, if the dates are correct in front of me, and you've served on past boards and chairs, so you have some sort of a level of competence that indicates as such. How would you respond to those accusations from the Conservative MPs?
Well, they're factually untrue, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come back to here today to be able to answer questions like yours.
Thank you for stating that very concisely. In your commentary today, and I'm not sure if it was your opening statement or in response to the members' questioning, you indicated that you felt strongly about the potential conflict or the conflict in terms of Ms. Verschaeren, but that there was no email sent, or you didn't write down this and put it in a letter or a memo or anything to that extent. In hindsight, do you think you should have done that, or am I missing something in your testimony? You can correct me, but that struck me, and I perked up when you indicated that.
Well, I guess I would say, sir, that papering myself to protect myself is not a practice that I usually think is a priority. What I try to do is give fearless advice, and I hope it would be followed.
Okay. The role of an individual in being president and CEO of any organization is of high responsibility, and I would say the bar is very high in terms of disclosing conflicts, of raising red flags, and basically protecting the I forget the word is coming to mind, protecting the organization's ability to competently undertake investments, in this case, SDTC, and so forth. As my colleague beside me has said, there's a fiduciary responsibility that you have as the CEO, and any CEO would have. At that time that you have indicated that you may not have written down your thoughts about what was going on, should you not have written down your thoughts and emailed them, or indicated or kept that memo and said, or indicated a memo and said, you know what, I may not agree with this, or this potential conflict exists? Because this happens on a daily basis, and minutes are taken, notes are taken. Folks, and obviously people have conversations all the time, of course, but don't you think this warranted that level?
I asked Ms. Verschaeren, I advised Ms. Verschaeren to go to the ethics commissioner. I told Mr. Noseworthy that there was a significant concern. My employee in the government relations lead told the minister's office. Yes, I expressed concern, and we did it at multiple levels. That's my duty, and that's what I did. When the minister then decides to not accept that advice, I have to accept that too.
And with that, colleagues, we are out of time. I want to thank our witness, Ms. Lawrence, as well as waiting extra time to accommodate the committee's changed schedule. I want to thank the interpreters and the clerks and the clerk and analysts with putting up with me at the top of the table here, and wish everyone a safe and good night.